Yes. Yes.
Do you see us?
Yep.
All right. And we are live. Yay. Welcome, everyone, to this week's Weekly Wisdom Consent Forum. This week, our topic is ambiguous consent. I'm Christina McCabe. I'm facilitating and organizing, and I'm here with my gorgeous guest speakers, intimacy experts, Court Vox, Stacie Ysidro, and Ziggy Day. Say hi. Hi.
Hi.
I'm going to be facilitating today, and what these weekly wisdom consent forums look like is each of our gorgeous experts is going to bring you a topic, an insight, a tip, a bit of wisdom around ambiguous consent and how you can apply that to creating consent in your life in a manner that really helps to uplift and up-level consent. Because I'm really passionate about creating consent in a new way with a new voice. I'm an erotic blueprint coach, certified human potential coach, and I'm deeply passionate about consent in a manner that really allows us to expand and heal and explore. I love consent, that when we hear the word consent, we get excited and we want to dive in and know that we have infinite possibility here. So all of these wisdom forums are created in a way to bring you different tools and tips to help you create that consent in your lives. And this week, ambiguous consent. First, though, I'd like to go through a little bit about our forum guidelines, a little bit about how we roll, and you'll see that in the description on Facebook up there as well. But I like to always just read through them so everybody knows where we are and what we're doing. I'm going to screen share this and give these a read. Here we go. So embodied empowerment, that's my business. And guest coaches are showing up in our highest integrity and with loving intention. We are not, however, responsible for your emotional or physical well-being. By participating in this live event, either during the live forum or in later viewing, you consent to take responsibility for your own self-care and well-being and not hold anyone present responsible for you. All coaches speak for themselves, and while we support each other, we are each responsible only for our own voice. Differences of opinion are welcome. In fact, I celebrate them. They offer opportunity and potential to me. But shaming is not. So I will monitor and take action. That usually looks like just a pause and a reset, if needed, to make sure everyone feels safe and heard here. This and all weekly wisdom forums are inclusive of all gender identities and sexual preferences. If you do not feel represented, please message me privately or in the common chat to be heard. Your voice is a gift. This forum is not designed to address trauma or abusive betrayals of consent, either mental or physical. If you or someone you know is currently in danger, please private message me for local resources. And while I cannot guarantee that I can help, I'll do my best to connect you with people that can. All right. Got that business done. So in the description, also, you're going to see a list of all of our speakers and of their contact information, their websites. So if any of them resonate with you and you feel like you could benefit from working with them in the future, feel free to contact them. You're also going to see my contact information and a link to on my website where you can get information about them more in detail, and myself and how to work with me, as well as future forum and past forum replays and event information. You're also going to see my YouTube link so that you can see past forum consent clip replays, as well as pleasure practices and other yummy, juicy bits that I put in there. So feel free to subscribe so you can get that as soon as they come up. All right, let's get to the meat of this. So I'd love for my gorgeous intimacy experts, guest speakers, to introduce themselves. And we're going to start with you, Stacie.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Stacie Ysidro, and I am a sexuality coach. I'm a certified erotic blueprint coach and a spiritual life coach. And I love to work with people who are leaders in their own lives and who have hope for something greater, even though they may be going through a challenge right now. They're ready to move forward and let go of struggle and suffering and resistance and step into pleasure with grace and ease and experience personal freedom. And I'm based in Tampa, Florida.
Thank you. All right, let's get Court in.
Hey everybody, my name is Court Vox. I am a somatic sex educator, a surrogate partner, and sacred intimate. I work predominantly with clients in Los Angeles and also New York. I work with all bodies and orientations. And I am a part of a group of sex and intimacy somatic sex educators who are part of a team of people who run Back to the Body sensuous retreats for women. So I am happy to be here.
Wonderful, thank you. And Ziggy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ziggy. I'm a sexological body worker and somatic sex educator. I'm based in Queensland on the Gold Coast in Australia. I'm the president at the moment of the Somatic Sex Educators Association of Australasia. So shout out to the association. If you're looking for a practitioner, get in touch with me and I'll set you up. I'm interested in embodiment and the interface between embodiment and sexuality. And I've been doing this work for a few years now. Happy to be here.
So happy you're here. Happy that all of you are here. This is really important to me. I really love to start these off before we get to your topics with just getting everyone's idea of what empowered consent is. If you would take a moment to give me that bit. What do you think? What does empowered consent mean to you?
That's
Anyone?
a big question. That's Stacie, did you have something?
I was just going to say that empowered consent feels like I have all of the information that I need to make a decision, and that I'm completely in touch with my body and my values and where I'm at. So having all that information, I can make a decision with discernment on what's going to be best for me in that moment.
I like the decision with discernment.
I think for me, what comes up is having a practice of empowered consent. So understanding how my own reactions to questions play out through experience rather than just thinking about it is where the conversation of consent turns into empowered consent for me.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think those are both valid for me, having the practice and knowing what it feels like in my body to be able to make informed choices, and also to have enough information to make a choice, enough information in any given moment, because sometimes what might look like consent for me in this moment might not be tomorrow, might not be the same. And I think that's where having a practice of consent comes in handy, because you're able to tap into something where you can check in with yourself, with your body, and go, yeah, this feels right. I can consent to this in this moment. So love both of those answers. And I think for me, it's like a combination of both, maybe.
Gorgeous. Thank you. Yeah, I want to take all of those and put them together. I also want to put forward this agency. For me, I need to have agency over my voice. I need to have an awareness or an ability, which those practices lead for me, that ability to really, I see you all commenting. I'll read it in just a minute. Thank you for being involved. The ability to communicate clearly. That's why ambiguous consent is really important to me. The ability to really know where I have freedom in my own communication and where it may be more difficult, and put in place those support systems if I know that I have a harder time in some places and the places that I'm empowered. And it's also, for me, I've really been paying attention to how capable am I of creating a space for others to speak empowered as well. That feels equally as important to me. How am I able to be mindful of my own reactivity so that I can take that aside and really set in presence with somebody else and what they're communicating as well? Let's see. Dean Stevens says the ability to say no after saying yes, changing your mind should be acceptable. Always.
I think even more than acceptable, it's really the center of consent as a living thing rather than, you know, a one-time legal rejoinder between people. Consent really is a living thing.
A living thing. Yeah, and I want to say even celebrated, right? I would love to even celebrate a change of mind, because the awareness that you knew in yourself that something changed here for you and you're able to communicate that. Yes, please. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and if somebody else says that to me, I get a really strong sense that they've got their own boundaries sorted out and in place. And that makes me feel good and safer to ask things if I know that they're capable of saying no, especially if they said yes yesterday. Yeah,
it softens a lot for me, creates a safety for me as well if I know others can come forward with their truth. So then, if that's empowered consent, what is ambiguous consent?
I think ambiguous consent is not necessarily something that's clear, right? It's kind of something that maybe there's no agreement around, there's no container around. Yeah, I think for me, it's just something that's not clear. And I think, you know, some of the things we were brainstorming on our prep call about ways to be more clear. I'm really excited to like jump into that.
Yeah, we're almost there. Me too. Yeah. That's the fun part. What do you all think? What's ambiguous consent to you?
Yeah, I agree. It's something that's not clear, something that's maybe not communicated. And I think that a lot of times that's what people do is they don't communicate about it and just go with something on assumption. So when it's not spoken and clear, then there could be a question.
Yeah, and if I'm getting mixed messages, that's ambiguous, obviously. But even if I'm giving myself or getting mixed messages from myself, my body and my head are telling me different things, that can be hard to sort out. And yeah, it's ambiguous. And yeah, we don't necessarily automatically know what to do in that situation.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up, Ziggy, because I wanted to pay attention to that myself, that ambiguous consent isn't only what I say to others, it's what I'm saying for myself, you know, and what others are saying to me, whether they're aware that they're being ambiguous or not.
And we have a tendency socially to be ambiguous until the final, until the final moment, in terms of sex when the clothes come off. Up until that point, we're trying not to expose our hand too much a lot of the time. We're trained to be that way. And so there's an awful lot of ambiguous conversation and mixed messages and things going around a lot of the time.
Yeah, even in definitely, certainly sexually and intimate encounters, but friendships, at work, in all kinds of relationships, socially, I think that we interact ambiguously, often more than clearly, depending on the circles we're traveling in, depending on how much work people are doing, to do those practices to make sure that they are empowered with their voices.
Yeah, we're trying to be tactful and to guard ourselves and not to stick our necks out a lot of the time. So it's not necessarily a negative motivation, but
yeah,
definitely we have that effect.
True. I would say often not negative motivation. Yeah.
I like what you said, Ziggy, about kind of oftentimes culturally, our languaging and our messaging is so ambiguous right up to the very moment where it's like, no, it's now a no. And like oftentimes when we're talking about, at least in the work that I'm doing, it's like, let's talk about the yellow before we get to the red. Like, let's talk a lot about the yellow, right? And because once we get to the red, we have to like stop and pause. But in that moment of yellow, there's a lot of like juiciness, a lot of learning to be had. And so I think you're right. There's a lot of ambiguity leading up right to the very final moment where it's either a yes or a no. And it's much harder to say that when you've gone that far.
Very true.
Yeah, I think a lot of it also has to do with, wanting to be accepted from someone else and maybe not wanting to hurt someone's feelings. So it could be like a people pleasing thing, and also a fear of rejection,
Yeah, I think we each have so many stories, valid in their way for each of us personally, but we have so many stories that create that ambiguous nature, that ambiguous communication. That said, how about we get into some tools and some tips? I believe we are starting with you, Court. Great.
When you brought this to me and you had a couple different concepts, I chose this one really because I think there's a way to use language in a very straightforward way that creates very distinct and decisive consent, right? And in my personal life, I've started to use this a lot and really requesting and inviting people to use specific language, as well as my own clients. Languaging like, what do you want to do for dinner? Whatever. It's like, well, no, would you like Italian or would you like Japanese? Italian. Do you like this? Sure. Sure is not a definitive answer. It's kind of like this lackluster word. And same thing with like fine, sure, okay. There are these kind of like very like middle ground, kind of like appeasing words. And they're not clear. They're kind of these ambiguous words. I also play this game with clients called May I Will You. And it's such a simple game, but the languaging is so direct. It's, may I brush your hair? Yes, no. There's no other way necessarily until you get into like negotiating. Yes, and I want you to brush it fast, right? So using the language of may I, which is a direct question, or will you do this to me, with negotiation. I also like using the word and instead of but in negotiation conversations. Kind of creates possibility instead of negating what we've just said. So yes, I'd like you to brush my hair and I'd like you to do it very slowly. That's such a clear directive, right? And then the person who's giving has a very clear message of what they're doing. And in that way, everybody's getting what they want, which is kind of the goal. And really, when I work with clients, it's all around sexuality and sensuality, intimacy. Consent is a big part of the work that I do. And I think when you start to deal with this type of work, it really transcends beyond, right? I really look at like sexual energy as our life force energy. And when you can start to make these requests in this part of your life, it really has this trickle up effect, not trickle down, because you're already there. You're at the root. You're at the core of your center, right? And it has this trickle up and trickle out effect into your life. That's so different than other modalities. I do have a lot of clients that are dancers and yogis, and in many ways they're connected to their bodies, and they're still having difficulties with intimacy and sexuality. And I think it comes down to this piece, which is ambiguity, right? And when we can be very specific with our language, it's almost like a very accessible way to move into something that's very clear. So yeah, language is very important. And language kind of transcends what we're feeling inside in a very clear way. And when we can ask for what we want in a very specific way, the person that is giving can give it in a very clear way too, or say no. And that's a possibility as well.
So you're bringing to everybody this this invitation to speak clearly and to ask for clear responses from others. Yes?
Yeah.
And David Miron, who's been on several of these, hi David, nice to see you here, says clear request requires clear understanding of your desires and preferences, and I agree. Yeah. And so I think that goes back to what Ziggy was bringing up earlier around the practices to get you to that place where you have that clarity for yourself.
I actually want to say something about that is I would say yes and no. Yes, you have to have clear requests require clear understanding of your own desires. And in languaging, you might say, I don't know. I don't know what I want. And I'm open to trying, right? You have asked if I like sensation play. I don't know. I'm being upfront with you. And I would like to try. So creating possibility and openness for something new, for you to discover a new desire, a new preference, right? And using really clear language to message that.
I like that. Thank you so much. I'm really appreciating your and instead of but. When you first said that, I felt my whole body just, it was visceral for me. It was very felt sense of, oh, okay, that feels really nice. Yeah.
Such a simple nuance.
But deeply powerful. David says again, true, clear communication can also allow uncertainty. Stacie and Ziggy, what do you think here?
I think that's really true about being able to say, I don't know. Like, that's a legitimate answer. It's much more legitimate than sure, caught, as you were saying before. If somebody says, would you like it if I, nibbled your ear or whatever, I don't know is a good answer. And I don't think I want you to try it, or I do think I want you to try it, and we'll see how it goes. You've got to be able to own up to the part that is true for you, rather than just acquiescing.
And I think just to speak about a nuance of language that you just used, which is, would you like it if I did this to you? Instead of, may I do this to you? Would you like it if I did this to you? You're going to get another ambiguous answer, which is, I would like it. Okay, now what? Can I do it?
It's not a clear request. It's one that I think comes up a lot. I want to give you something, but I don't know what it is, and you don't know what it is that you want me to give you, and we're getting confused instead of just saying, here's the thing that I would like to do with you,
right?
Or would like you to do with me, which has a clear objective and somebody who we know who's doing the thing and we know who it's for.
Yeah, I would say true, clear communication, from what David said, allowing uncertainty, it's again back to that celebration of the changed mind. Celebrate this uncertainty as well. That's real. Great. Thanks. We're uncertain here. What do we need? Thank you for that communication. Stacie, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of courage to be in the I don't know.
Yeah.
And I love that because it's there's curiosity there. And I'm definitely one, I've noticed about myself personally that I'm so willing to go there and try something, and I'll figure out if I like it or not, so yeah, I enjoy the possibility of experiencing something, so I can figure that out and know moving, know what I like moving forward. So yeah, coming from a place of curiosity. And I think that's also why I like what you said, Court, about the yes and, because a but seems like an accept, or like I think I forget the word you use, but it negates what
Negate.
you, yes, but it's like almost an opposite. So I do appreciate the yes and I love being in the space of curiosity and possibilities around the I don't know. Let's figure it out.
I also think just, and this is a little bit of a challenge, and you might disagree with me, and I think people do know what their desires are, and they do know what their wants are. And sometimes it takes, saying, you do know what you want. Tap into your body. Where do you want to be touched right now? I'm not going to touch you until you give me direction. And sometimes that kind of not knowing is more about not wanting to ask, or feeling shame around what the ask is, or feeling that they will receive a no. And so really, and I don't always do this, but sometimes with clients, I will say, I'm going to challenge you a little bit. I'm going to challenge you that you do know what you want, and I'm here to receive whatever that is. And I think sometimes that's really what it's about. It's about receiving a no that keeps us from asking for what we want, the shame of judgment and denial. And so, yeah, there's a part of us that does know instinctually and like from a gut level.
I would be curious, because you're talking about with clients, right? So I'm assuming with that client relationship, you've already set some kind of a container or consent agreements there. And then them coming to you as a client, then they've already in some way said, I'm seeking something from you here, right? To push me or grow me in some way. But if we're just talking about, lovers or friends or people that we're on a day-to-day basis with, where do you think the line is around asking consent to push? To say, I think you do know. Do you want to ask consent before you do that?
That's a very good question, Christina. I have personal experience with that with a partner, and I push him often to make choices, small choices. What would you like for dinner? I don't know. Well, you do know, because every time I make the decision, it's not what you wanted, and you wanted something else. So I'm going to ask you again, what would you like for dinner? I'm going to give you 3 choices. Would you like Chinese, Italian, or pizza? I would like pizza. Perfect. We can move on. And that's a fun, simple thing. But he does know. He knows what he wants.
Can you all hear me? You're a little frozen for me. Am I frozen for you also? Oh, there you are.
It goes in and out.
Okay. Stacie and Ziggy, I have a little bit of an interesting feeling around what you're saying, Court. So I would love to play with it a little bit, but I'm curious, Stacie and Ziggy, what you think about this.
I definitely have been in situations where I have challenged someone and said, well, actually, I think that you do know. And I can relate to that. Is in the past, I would say, well, I don't really know. And then I realized, I'm like, wait a minute, I do know something. So then I found myself starting to say, this is what I know. What I know is XYZ. So I do think there's a place for some challenge in certain areas. And I also sometimes have awareness around there's too many choices. And so for me, when there's too many things, I'm just like, okay, never mind, that's too much. But if I have 3 choices, then I'm like, okay, this is a 3 choices thing. So kind of depending on where I'm at, sometimes when there's too many different things, it like gets me in my head. And then now I'm thinking about this, or do I want that, or this and that. And then I'm like, you know what, never mind, that's just too much. And when I know, I'll know, and that's what it'll be. So I just being in a space of too much, too many options, and then like, okay, these are my options. And I think that goes back to what you were saying, Court, about like the clear languaging. This is a request, or these are some options, A or B, what is it?
Thank you. Ziggy, what do you think?
I think the what do you want for dinner example is a really common one, and I've come across that a lot in family situations. And I think the thing that worries me is that we get okay with the idea that, well, I don't know, and I'm not going to make a decision because it's too hard, and I'm going to leave it up to somebody else. We train ourselves to be okay in that mode, and in sitting in that. And then when it comes to other things that are much trickier and more emotional than what do you want for dinner, we've trained ourselves to leave all the decision making up to somebody else. And it bleeds into things like, how do you want to be touched, or where do you want to be touched? As a practitioner, I love the Bossy Massage program, where if somebody doesn't come up with something that their body wants, you don't give them anything. And I think that bleeds into my personal life, where if somebody is not sure what they want, well, I'm going to wait until you have an idea, because I want to know from you what it is. Not all the time, but I think that there's a big place for that in my relationships, in being around people who want to take responsibility for that themselves. And I think the here's 3 options instead of 400 is like a useful practice, but it's not one that I want to use all the time, because it makes it too easy in some senses for the other person, and they're not learning. They're not learning to dive into their own body and their own desires and figure out what it is that comes from them.
Yeah. It meant a lot to me when you mentioned this, getting used to saying, I don't know, with the simple things, then really allows that space for us to just take that to the more intimate settings, or the places where it's more difficult even to say our clear answers. I tend to be a very powerful presence. So I have to be a little bit careful. So I've been really playing with and paying attention to really asking for consent from others to push them. I've had a couple times when I was doing a little bit of pushing with friends or family or relationships, and they were like, I don't want to be pushed right now. And others that came back later and said, I didn't really want to be pushed. So it gave me the understanding that, just as in fixing, do you have friends or people in your life that are always fixing everything you say, the fixers, right? Asking permission before offering resources, asking permission before trying to fix or up level others. So for me, it's been a practice recently for my own awareness, to sit back and say, I'm kind of feeling something different, that maybe you do know a clear answer. Is it okay if we explore that? So asking a little bit of consent around that feels important to me right now.
I think something that you said earlier, Christina, was, just a reflection on my my noticing around this, is that, when I'm working with clients, there's already been a container that's been established, right? I would say you're right. When I am working or am being with friends or lovers or companions or family, it is different when I want to push them. You know, that might look like, would you like me to listen or do you want my advice? You know, and that's a very clear languaging too. And sometimes it's like, I just want you to listen. It's like, great, I'm gonna be here. Yeah, so I think it really it goes back to the container that you're in, and it gets a little bit more nuanced when you're dealing with people in your personal life, because you're right. It's like, do you want me to help you up level this, or do you want me to just be present for you in all your feels right now? Two different things.
Something else is just coming to me, like around the I don't know, especially around just like day-to-day things, and feeling like I'm not in a space where I want to make a decision. I've been making decisions all day. I've been directing things all day. I don't want to make any decisions. So I would prefer that someone else make the decision. So almost kind of being in a space to where I'm okay with what you decide, and I'm giving consent for you to make that decision because I'm like in a submissive space, or I'm in an introverted state. I don't want to make decisions right now. You know, so I guess I just wanted to bring that up, is that sometimes, you know, we can be in a space where we don't want to make decisions, and we're willing to allow someone else to make that decision and go with that too.
Thank you. Yeah, I was thinking that as well. The difference for me is that I tend to be very clear with my communication. I do the practices to be able to do that. So then when is it, for those of us that are doing those practices, when is it our responsibility to create and hold that space for others to offer their clear communication? Some people, it's very difficult to say that, to say, you know, I just don't, I want to not know right now. Or
I mean, I think, Stacie, there's a lot of people in that position, right? They work all day long. They're in power positions at work, and at the end of the day, they don't want to make any more choices. They don't want to make any decisions. And I think that is also a choice and a decision that you are consenting to. You do it. I did this all day long. I really need you to take care of me. And what that looks like is for you to decide what we're having for dinner, for you to decide how you're giving me this sexy bath, for you to decide how we're gonna play sensually tonight. I'm game. I just don't want to make the choice. And that's a choice. And that's like a clear communication in
Yeah,
consent.
I think that's the difference for me. That you were talking before about a situation with somebody where you were offering them choices, and they were saying they didn't want to make a choice, but they were saying no to all of your suggestions about what to eat. That's a different situation from communicating that I want to surrender,
Right.
which is a great place to work in and play in a lot of the time. And, you know, it's a valid choice. But as you said, Court, it's a choice rather than a habit or a conversational gambit or whatever it is that happens when somebody says, oh, I don't know, you choose, and then says no to all of the, you know, all of the suggestions.
yeah, that's a really good point, because at that point it is clear consent or not. It's clear communication. It's not ambiguous when it's actually that choice. I just want to say to all of you joining us, thanks for being here. I'm seeing new people popping on, and I'm talking with my gorgeous intimacy experts here about consent in a way to bring consent healing and exciting and interesting and full of possibility and potential. And we are talking specifically around ambiguous consent with the intention to help you get some clarity so that you can create consent that up levels you and gets you and in your relationships in the manner that really supports what you want and your desires. I want to read a couple of these these comments here. Johnny Vajra says, sometimes it's so liberating to make the choice not to make any choices for the remainder of the day, evening. Yeah, totally. And David, again, said, Multi-Amory podcast has a system. Triforce 1, I want to be witnessed. Triforce 2, I want support. Triforce 3, I want advice. I want to be witnessed. I want support. I want advice. This has been super helpful. And I use it in my regular Facebook, I think, David, just stating that at the top post. So if I only want to be witnessed or supported. Yeah. So basically those three manners of communication. I want support. I want advice. I want to be witnessed.
I guess my question in that would be, how is support different than advice? That would be my only, I guess I understand what being witnessed is. Yeah, those would be my only questions. Is what is the difference between being supported and giving advice? And maybe that's just like a nuance in that language, but
that may question that as well. I might just ask, how can I support you? If you're asking for support then. All right. How would it feel at this point to move on to Stacie? Does everyone feel complete here, or do we have more to say around specific languaging? Feeling good?
Yeah, that felt great.
Yes.
Okay. Stacie.
Okay, so when I was thinking about what to share about, what came up for me was around so many people and their just normal lives and in our culture and society indulge in the use of drugs and alcohol. So I'm not judging or shaming. I'm just bringing that to attention. And that there's often times when we're under the influence of a substance, it can blur our lines of consent. And sometimes people use drugs or alcohol to step into sexual spaces so that they don't have to deal with what's actually coming up within them to move forward into that space. So I guess, you know, that just that question around with yourself, first of all, is when I am intoxicated, am I giving authentic consent? For me personally, I like to be in a sober space because I feel grounded and I know I can make a decision with all the information and being in touch with me. But for others, is, you know, a couple of drinks, am I still in my faculties? If I have more than this, or if I do another substance, am I able to authentically consent? Would I be doing this if I wasn't intoxicated? What would that be like? And then putting that towards another person. Okay, you're out. Can someone that's intoxicated really authentically consent to a situation with you? And where is that line that you draw on interacting with someone who is intoxicated? And, you know, I hear a lot of, you know, people say they're afraid of being taken advantage of, or people saying they're afraid they're going to be accused of taking advantage of someone. And I have noticed when drugs and alcohol are involved, you start getting into this gray area, and there's a possibility of consent regret. Is, okay, I did this, we were drinking, and then the next day, now I wish I wouldn't have done that, or I feel some kind of way about it. And then that is cloudy there. So I guess my invitation is just to consider, how often are people using intoxicants to step into situations or to avoid consent conversations at all, or to negate like their own boundaries? And just to create awareness around that, because if we're always using a substance to step into pleasure, we're wiring our brains and our bodies to enter pleasure that way. And so what would it look like to not use a substance and really step into pleasure? And what's the difference there? And I feel like that's so juicy, because stuff does come up, and it's an opportunity for healing, and it's an opportunity for just more awareness and to get to know yourself more, to get to know someone else more, and to be fully conscious and fully present. People crave intimacy and connection. And when we're under the influence of a substance, a lot of times it affects our ability to really authentically connect with someone on a deep level. Would you have that same connection if you weren't intoxicated? What would that look like? So I just wanted to kind of throw that stuff out there and just get people to start thinking about, how often does substance use affect my ability to consent, or someone else's ability to consent? And where do I draw the line for myself personally, and then dealing with other people?
I think, sorry.
No, it looked like you had something. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think it's something that you touched upon that's always doesn't feel safe enough for me to engage with someone who's on intoxicants is sex regret, right? It's like that next day, in the moment, they're all about it. And then the next day, it's like, I was drunk. Like, I didn't want that. It's like, well, you didn't say you didn't want that. Your body language said you wanted it. Your words said you wanted it. And still there's this piece the next day that there's sex regret. And for me as a partner, that doesn't feel safe enough for me. I also think that, there are specific drugs that I've used to enhance an experience. And so I don't want to negate that. And I also know my body really well. I know that after 3 drinks, I stop making own choices, right? So 3 drinks for me is like enough. And I'm still in my body, I'm still in my mind. I think the danger gets to be when, like you said, when you're using intoxicants to kind of override something, right? There's shame or there's fear in getting into these sexual moments, which are very vulnerable and very intimate. And you've just overridden all of your body's defense mechanisms, choice mechanisms, because it's too painful to address them. And I think that's when it gets a little bit like, okay, we need to look at this a little bit. So yeah, I think in terms of clients, I've had clients ask me if they can do mushrooms or marijuana or MDMA, and that's like an absolute no. That just doesn't feel safe at all. For me as a practitioner, it's also not in our code of ethics.
Yeah.
And I've had clients that still push. They still push.
I want to read a couple of these comments here. First, I just want to thank you, Stacie, for bringing this. I think it's so powerful and really needs to be talked about. I think it's vital when it comes to clear communication that we pay attention to where is the line with intoxicants when it comes to if we are able to give clear communication or hear it if we're dealing with somebody else who's intoxicated. Where is our responsibility there? So David said, yes, Stacie, so important about consent and intoxicants. Very yes to the wiring. Being with someone who could only be intimate if intoxicated left me feeling more alone. Yeah, that's a good point. It's not only about how it feels for me the next day if I've needed intoxicated to connect with someone, but also if I'm connecting with someone that could only do that if they're intoxicated. That doesn't fulfill me either. Thank you, David. And then Dean Stevens said, that is powerful. Thanks, Stacie. A huge concern with being aware of substances and lack of communication without this aid. Ziggy.
Yeah, two things come up for me. First one is habit, and the second one, well, we'll do habit first. Stacie, you were talking about this situation where somebody always needs to drink or take a particular drug in order to get into that space. And it's like any habit around sexuality to a degree. What am I doing to challenge my own patterns? You know, how often am I stepping out of what I usually do in order to experience a more full sense of my arousal or who I am or my identity? I think that's really important. And when you're talking about substances, it can be really difficult to step out of that habit because to some degree, we're biologically wired to stay in that habit. But I think it gives us a really good little handle to say, okay, maybe today I'll try it without getting drunk because I wanted to see what that's like. And on the flip side, I think there's power in making a conscious choice to say, well, I want to know what it's like to be intimate or to connect with somebody in this altered space. And I think you have to be careful about making that choice, obviously, but I think there's some empowerment in saying, yeah, I want to have an altered experience today.
Yeah, it feels to me like, if we're talking about empowered consent, if we're talking about using consent to open possibility and potential, then maybe those substances can live within those consent containers if we're very clear with our communication around what that looks like and what that means for us and others. What do you all think about that?
Yes, and I also think, I'm just speaking from my statement, for me to be able to play with somebody in that way, in an altered state or a heightened state, I really need to know them really well. I need to trust the container that we've already created together. I need to trust their consent already, not having been in altered states, right?
Such a good point.
For numerous parts of our relationship. I need to know that when we go into that the script is not going to get flipped on me. And so, I need to feel safe enough. And part of that is having the container already established.
Mm-hmm. And I think that goes back, at least for me, I'll talk I statements as well. Thank you, Court. For me, it goes back to that my own definition of empowered consent means holding space for others to a certain degree as well. I mean, ultimately, I don't consider myself responsible for another person's consent. That's up to them. But I want to create a space where I'm only open to empowered consent, And so I'm not, or a conversation to get us empowered. For me, then, my consent is that I don't want to be in an intoxicated space intimately with somebody unless we already have established trust and a clear container around that. That would be creating clear consent for me.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this, what we're talking about, because we all are within this realm of sexuality and coaching and body work, is I feel like we're kind of the exception there. We do have languaging around this. We have a lot of consciousness around this. And from what I found is when I do talk to people about sexuality without using drugs or alcohol, they look at me like I have three heads. Like, are you kidding me? Like, why would you have sober sex? Like, that's not even a thing, And I'm like, okay, cool. And it doesn't mean that they have a problem with drugs or alcohol, but like we were talking about the wiring, it's okay, I've got like fear of rejection and I need to have a few drinks to loosen up so I can get the courage to go talk to this girl. Or, okay, I'm, a very conservative, proper looking, person throughout my life. So when I go and have a few drinks, then I get to unleash this wild craziness, and it's a free for all, and on and on. So it's just interesting to acknowledge that there's a lot of people that are in different spaces around that. And so I'm loving everybody's input and just talking about this to just create some awareness around it. Like, what would that be like? And to be empowered enough to, you know, to express your sexuality fully, or to be able to accept a no, or a not right now, you know, without needing to, like you said, override those boundaries and stuff within ourselves, like to face those fears and heal that stuff so that we can move forward empowered and like fully conscious and aware.
Thank you. I wanted to say for our watchers that if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments, and I'll see if I can get to them for you. So when it comes to this, you know, the broader population that maybe doesn't have that same skill practice around the kind of communication and consent conversations, what is your recommendation if somebody wants to step out of using substances to gain intimacy and yet doesn't feel that they have the resilience or emotional strength to do that? How would you give them a first step toward getting there?
Well, I would say, first of all, acknowledging that is a huge deal. So I would really celebrate someone acknowledging, hey, I do want to step into this space sober, and then start addressing some of the fears. You know, let's talk about what you're afraid of. What is holding you back from experiencing this? And then really get clear on what kind of experience do you want to have? Because a lot of times I found people are like, they get in an unhelpable state. Meaning that they're so caught up in what's not working for them and what's not going right and what they don't want, that they have no vision of hope for something better, or they have no possibility of anything better. So that's kind of where I like to start working on starting to create a vision of, what do you want that to look like? What does that look like to you? And let's address some of the things that are holding you back so we can start to heal that and move forward.
Gorgeous. Thank you.
You know, for me, I have quite a few clients who have come to me as recovering meth addicts. And meth is sadly something that plagues the gay community, the queer community. And they've gotten to a certain point, right, where they're clean, you know, they're not using anymore. They've dealt with a lot of the reasons why they were doing it. And then there's that last piece, which is, I can't be intimate with it. I can't even receive touch without it. I don't even know what that's like. And so, again, you know, coming to a practitioner like myself or like one of you, it's like you're walking into a container that is safe enough to explore, that is safe enough to where you say, take your hands off of me. My hands go up, and what was that about? What happened? Was there you know, where in your body did that freeze take place? And really, you know, it's like a journey back to your body in that way, because so many of those men have their whole sexual identity and experience has been on drugs. And so all of the stuff that pushed them into that, the shame and the denial and the body awareness and consciousness, comes rushing back. It's not left. It has not left the building. Meanwhile, they have been gone from their body this whole time. And so it's almost like a reintroduction, a rewiring into their pleasure systems, a relearning of what makes them tick, what's hot for them, you know, what does intimacy even look like without that? And so, yes, I think like acknowledging that there was an issue is like, it's the first step. And I think, you know, going to NA and having sponsors. And psychotherapy is valuable. I'm not ever going to deny that. And then there comes a point where it's like, I gotta bring this back to the actual physical body that I'm in. Like,
Yeah.
and sometimes that means working with a practitioner who's holding a very safe container.
Yeah.
That's why we're all here.
Hey.
I agree.
Tell them about the embodiments.
Yeah.
Yeah, and finding the one that really resonates with you. I mean, that's why we're all here too, why I organize these, because I want people to see all of us.
Mm.
What's going to resonate with one of you may not resonate with me, and vice versa. I want everyone out there to have somebody that can help them create that safe container to do that healing, find their voice, find their pleasure, find their desires. Maybe it's not even intimately that they're having a hard time. Some people need to drink just to have conversations.
I agree.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say I agree, and I think if somebody comes to me and we find out that being out of control is part of their sexual script or their core erotic theme, there's power in unpacking that. And it's the kind of thing that you do with a practitioner of some kind in a space that's been created for my unpacking. And it's not a relationship space that's about a whole lot of other stuff. And at the same time, I think it's important for me as a practitioner not to pathologize that core erotic theme. If there's a theme there where somebody has learned that they need to, or what arouses them is this sense of not quite being in control, how do we make that legitimate and a place for exploration and a thing that people can extend from into other kinds of arousal if they want to, and create safety for, in all sorts of senses, for them as a user of substances, as well as an erotic person.
I love that. Not pathologize. It's important. I appreciate that. And I appreciate what you said earlier around curiosity, Stacie, as well. And I think those two go really well together. That initial curiosity of what's going on here and not making it wrong necessarily, but let's do an exploration and an uncovering. There may needs to be some healing, but let's not just initially judge that. Yeah, thank you. On that, I would love to get your voice in here, Ziggy, and come forward with your tip, your tool that you're bringing forward.
Okay. So what came up for me when we were discussing tools that we wanted to bring, and what comes up for me all the time is this embodiment piece around desire and consent and being clear about what I want. And I work with a lot of people who are just sort of starting their journey of embodiment, and it always brings me back to when I was starting mine. And the most powerful thing around consent for me at that point was, how do I come into my body and figure out what it actually wants? What is it telling me? Where does it want to be touched and how? Because I had no language for that and no experience of that prior to coming into a practice with a practitioner of finding an embodied sense of my own wants and desires. So what I wanted to do today was guide just a couple of minutes of embodiment practice for anybody who's watching now or watches later. Hopefully you'll enjoy joining in. So if you feel like you'd like to close your eyes, you're welcome to do that. You don't have to. If you can put your feet on the floor or the ground or wherever you're sitting or standing, that's useful. And if you're sitting, bring your attention to the pressure on the parts of the body where you're resting on your chair or your bed or wherever you're resting. Just allow your attention to rest there on your sit bones or your back or wherever you're resting against your surface, and feel into what that's like. And on your next in-breath, take conscious control of that breath without altering the speed or the depth or the pattern of your breathing. Become aware that you're choosing to breathe in and to breathe out. And just retain that conscious sense of being the person breathing. And as you breathe, bring your attention to your toes and give them a little wiggle if you can. Feel the sensuality of wiggling your toes. And then allow your attention to float upwards into your calves and knees and your thighs. Just feeling what that feels like, what you notice. And then allow your attention to continue to shift upwards into your pelvis, your genitals, and your lower back and your belly. Just noticing what's there. And feeling for the center of your body. When you bring your attention to your heart space, I want you to pause for a moment and bring to mind a situation where you weren't sure what you wanted, whether it was intimate or not intimate. Just bring to mind the last time, perhaps, that you weren't quite sure what you wanted. And while you sit with that, take a moment to see, if you can, where in your body that sits. Where do you notice a sensation of not being quite sure or of searching for an answer? And you may find somewhere or you may not. But if something comes up, just allow yourself to sit next to that. Sit next to that sensation and be curious about it for a moment. If you would like to bring your hand to that part of your body, if you noticed a part of your body where that ambiguity sat, just allow for a moment to give that part of your body some attention and a sense of gratitude for coming to your attention. And then when you feel ready, you're welcome to reopen your eyes and rejoin the group. So we take another breath. Thank you for joining in that with me. I think what's powerful about that for me is that it reminds me that the emotion comes from here. You can't see where I'm pointing. The emotion comes from my body. The questions come from my body, and the answers come from my body. They come from my head too, but I need to be consciously and constantly aware of what my body is doing in order to figure out what I want to consent to. And I think practicing that, and you can practice that as often as you want, can only improve our ability to notice what it is that we want to ask for. Or if we want to ask for the right to not ask for anything.
Thank you.
I'm curious how that sits with people. I'm always curious how that sits with people.
For me, it felt, you know, I've had several guests lead us embodied on my past forms. You can see those on YouTube. It's on the links on the description. Through various levels. When you had us notice, but then give gratitude to that, or just that awareness, I really noticed a nice little softening. And I really appreciated that right there. I think that's something that we can often forget, is to just be in gratitude for the information and to be in curiosity rather than going into a judgment.
Yeah, I don't want anybody to think that the body is always right and the mind is always wrong.
Yeah.
But we do need to be aware that the body is a great source of information that we're not necessarily trained in our, in our school days or whatever to access.
I'm curious if you, with your clients, would take them a little further into feeling where the yes and the no feel as well, instead of just the ambiguity.
Yeah, definitely. And you play yes and no games and all sorts of things about which can be quite quick, where you just have a sense in your body that it's a yes or a no, or you can do like a focusing technique where sometimes with clients I'll spend half an hour just having them sit next to the sensation of yes, the felt sense of yes and or no, and what does that want from you? And it can be a really slow, juicy process.
I love juicy processes. Thank you. Court and Stacie, how was that for you?
I always love embodiment exercises. There's always something new, some new information there. I think that the key word for those is practice, right? It's like it's something that's ongoing. It's not something that you just learn and then you're like, I got it. It's like, our bodies are constantly changing. Our bodies are constantly changing on a cellular level, not just, we're not just getting wiser because we're living. We're actually like molecularly and cellularly changing. And so, that embodiment exercise for me today might look different tomorrow. And I think it's important to keep checking in. And the more you practice, the more you check in with your own body and asking those questions, what do I want? Or where is there something blocking me? Is it in my chest? Is it in my throat? Like, what's going on with my leg? It's like, didn't notice that before this embodiment exercise. And so I think it's important to keep practicing, just like you would yoga or voice lessons or anything. If you want to cultivate a richness around it, an actual wisdom, it's a constant learning. It's a constant growth. And so thank you for that. I don't always get to do those, at least not led by other people. So I loved it. Thank you very much.
I love the embodiment piece, and thank you for that, because I have done a lot of yeses and nos, but it was really fun to feel into the ambiguous one. So that was a nice shift to create awareness around what that feels like in my body. And I think the embodiment is such an important piece of what all of us do, because in real life, people are so caught up in the doing and the checking off all the boxes and the one thing to the next and what's next and what's better and the grass is always greener, and they're so scattered. And when I ask them, what's going on in your body, they're like completely disconnected. I have no clue. I don't know what that means. I don't know where that lives. So I love, just like you said, a practice of starting to just go in and connect and come into stillness and come into what is in this moment and just be with that. And I think that that's such a valuable piece, and it's so much needed in today's culture and society.
The other thing that I guess I wanted to mention about embodiment is about body language. And we hear a lot about reading other people's body language. If you want to figure out whether they're actually saying yes or no, then you read their body language, you learn to understand that. But I think we need to, or we get benefit from understanding our own body language. Am I leaning into this, or am I leaning out? Because my social script is messing with my decision making, or is part of my decision making, and my body is another part. So how do I sort out what's actually going on? Maybe I'm kind of physically leaning out of this interaction, but my social script is saying I need to say yes. How do I get all of that information together? And am I constantly touching my face during this interaction because I'm worried about what's going on? Am I fidgeting a lot? I think it's worth becoming good at noticing our own body language and getting information from that, because we have more than one message going on in us often, especially if it's a stressful situation.
Such a good point. I would say for me, even, that getting in touch with my own is critical before trying to read others. That I need that personal awareness first. And I'll say for me, because maybe it works different for others, that they need to tap into what others are saying in order to feel into themselves. I'm not sure, but for me, I need to be able to take that pause, to take my own ownership and that gorgeous, curious exploration of what's happening, whether it feels good or not. But putting that pause and that exploration can do a lot for me. And I find for others, my clients are constantly amazed with what happens when they go into their bodies and what wisdom lives there for them. So either those that are used to doing it, or many that have never been in touch with their bodies in that way.
I love that you just said that, because at one time, it's kind of like a funny story, but it's exactly what you just said. I was asked a question and I was explaining the answer, and my mentor said, okay, well, remember to tell your face. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Okay, got it. But it's exactly what you were saying, is like what was coming out of my mouth, my face and my body was obviously doing something different. And I thought it was hysterical, and it's kind of a joke, but it's exactly what you just said, is becoming aware of what am I actually doing and how am I physically communicating, not just my words.
Thank you, Stacie. Court, you had something to say.
Yeah, I think what's true for me is when I am embodied, when I am fully in my erotic, in my sensuality, in my kind of my root chakra, all of those things, I'm letting off some kind of body language that I'm not necessarily aware of. And I walk differently, I speak differently, I just exude something that I'm not necessarily intentionally putting out. It's just there. And the thing I'll say about that is that it's an indiscriminate energy. Is that it attracts all kinds of things, right? It attracts all kinds of people and personalities. And that's when like it needs to, like, I become a little bit more discriminate in terms of like who I'm letting in, right? Because again, when I'm in my true embodied self, I'm walking in a way that is attractive to other people, right? And a lot of times attraction, it doesn't have a discrimination, right? I'm not trying to attract a certain type of person and, or, you know, not attract somebody else. It just all comes. And at that point, it's like, how do I handle all this? What do I do with all of it? So I think body language, yes, there's a point where you have a certain control over it. Like you're talking about your face, like tell your face. I've definitely been in positions where I'm like, and my face is doing this. And then there's just sometimes where I'm just not fully aware of the things that I'm exuding out into the world. And so I guess there's I don't know, it's more of a question, it's a curiosity I'm having of how to balance the two, of really owning and being in my full embodied self, and also using like a more conscious body language to attract and keep the people that are supposed to be there. Am I making any sense?
I think so. I find something similar. I find something similar, and I take pauses. And I use a lot of discernment personally. Everyone might have their own practice with this, but I do a lot of work psychically. I do a lot of work with energy fields around me. I have a lot of practices like that, but I'm not a personal fan of boundaries. But if you are, then boundaries are a good one. But I like discernment more, choosing what energy is in my space or not. But I have to keep taking those pauses because, like you said, it's a practice. This ability to keep that awareness of what's coming in and what I'm doing is a practice that we get better and better and more fluid at, more versed at. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Ziggy, Stacie, do you have anything there?
I was just going to say what comes up for me is that when I notice those points in my own being where I'm walking differently or I'm sounding different because I'm really into where I'm at, I love that. Like I love to notice that I'm walking differently or I'm feeling like my body language is really positive. That's a real moment of joy and gratitude for me, that to notice that my body is reinforcing the message that I'm supposed to be wherever I'm at. Yeah, I love that.
Stacie, anything here?
Yeah, I just think it's just the awareness, having the awareness. You know, like sometimes it's been helpful for me when someone has mirrored back to me what my body's doing when I'm talking about something. You know, if I'm like, well, you know, I'm thinking about doing this, you know, I'm not really sure, I'm just kind of feeling into it. And if someone mirrors back to me, well, your body's doing this, your voice is doing that, the look on your face, and when you talk about this other thing, it looks like this. And then I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like that's great information and good to know, because I didn't have awareness around it in that moment. So yeah, I love sometimes getting reflections when I'm in a state of, I'm not really sure. And I definitely notice times when I do feel really grounded and empowered, and yeah, I move differently, and you know, my voice sounds different. And I don't think it's about trying to project something that we're not, or trying to, you know, put on an appearance of something. I just think it's a cool awareness to have. And it's also like a way that we can change our state. So if we are kind of feeling bummed out or lazy or whatever, and we want to feel more energized, physically changing our state, changing our breathing, changing our tone of voice helps to shift. So I think it's just awareness.
Mm.
I
Did you
think,
have something quickly, Ziggy, before we wrap up?
yeah, I just wanted to say that there's a double-edged sword that comes up for me there, where we can choose to modify how we're presenting because of the information that we're getting from someone, or we can choose to modify how we've perceived an interaction. So if somebody says to me, you said you were really excited, but you were slumping and definitely didn't look excited, I can choose to say, I guess next time I'd better try and look more excited, or I guess I wasn't that excited and maybe I should take some action around that, or have some awareness around that. I think both of those are possible, and often I sit too closely in that camp of listening to what my body was saying potentially, but it's all information.
Thank you. Well, we are getting close to the end of our time together for today. And I always like to end just seeing if there's anything specific that any of you want to that landed really deeply for you, that you want to ground quickly before we end, for yourselves, for each other, and for our participants.
I'll go ahead and go. Yeah, curiosity, and it's just information.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I agree. I think that moving outside of habit and saying, I'm curious about this and I just want to know what the information is, and I'll figure out what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I feel very complete. I feel really grateful to be on this call with all of you. Really enjoyed the discourse and communication. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you as well. I want to say that I got something really beautiful from each of you. I really just want to mention once again how much I loved what "and" did to my body. When you were talking about "and" instead of "but," Court, my whole system just melted in, and it created even a sense of safety for me. So I'm going to pay attention to that and play with that a little bit, because that has something there for me personally. So I want to let any of you watching now or that are going to watch this in the future know that everybody's information is in the description if you want to reach out to any of these gorgeous coaches and intimacy experts or myself to talk about how to create consent for yourself, or whatever other desires you're seeking to move forward and up level in your life. If you need support, reach out. My YouTube is also on there if you want to watch clips from past forums or future events, or get little pleasure practices from me in the future. Next week is Consent and Shame, number 2. We are diving into how shame affects InPowered Consent with 3 other amazing intimacy experts. These consent forums are every week. This is our first live. Yay, it was so fun to be live. Please feel free to reach out and join us anytime with comments, questions in the future. If you give them to me, I'll see if I can get them to any of the coaches here if they don't see them personally. And I always like to end with a poem. So I have a little poem to read for everybody before we get off. Okay. Awakening Now by Dana Falls. I hope I said her name right. Dana, I'm sorry if I didn't. Awakening now. Why wait for your awakening? Do you value your reasons for staying small more than the light shining through the open door? Forgive yourself. Forgive yourself. Now is the only time you have to be whole. Now. Now is the sole moment that exists to live in the light of your true nature. Perfection is not a prerequisite for anything but pain. Perfection is not a prerequisite for anything but pain. Please, oh please, don't continue to believe in your stories of deficiency and failure. This is the day of your awakening. Dana Falls, Awakening Now. My deepest gratitude to all of you for joining me, and to all of you that watched and participated and commented. May you have a beautiful, pleasure-filled day. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.